Welcome to OLC 40. This is week 9, class 33, exam prep part 2, and I am Jillian Percy. These are all the ways to reach me in the studio right now, 1-800-465-7144. I will be in the WASA office for a little while afterwards, 1-800-667-3703. You can fax your work to us at 1-800-463-7852. You can send me an email regarding your work at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. Be advised, it does take me a few days to get around to all the marking. I get quite a bit of stuff coming in. I'm not always able to get everything marked at once. Sometimes I have people sending me like 20 assignments at once, which takes a while for me to mark. You can re-listen to a recording at YouTube, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. You can submit your assignments at student.work@nnec.on.ca. Please remember to put your full name, lesson number, and assignment name or number on it, and the course. Also, if you can please make sure to attach it rather than send it directly in the email. I have some people like taking a photograph and then just putting the photograph in the email document. It's really hard to open those up properly. It's way easier if you either save it or there's usually a little function on your camera that allows you to send as an attachment rather than just send as an email. And that works really well. So if you do that, that's a big help for me being able to print it off to be able to mark it. Okay. Just going over the course marks. Unit assignments together will add up to about 70%. The literacy portfolio we talked about yesterday will come to 10%, and the final exam will be 20%. And together that adds up to 100%. Obviously, you get kind of whatever portion you have of those marks. Here are the levels of achievement. This is the Ontario Growing Success document from 2010, which, because we are providing the Ontario High School Diploma, is what we follow. So if you get below 50 on the course, it means you've not passed the course. Now, it is possible to not pass the exam and still pass the course, though. I just want to point that out. D corresponds to level 1, C corresponds to level 2, B corresponds to level 3, and it printed weird. Sorry, hang on a second. I was trying to do this. Okay. So B is like the provincial standard. That's what we're aiming for. If you're getting A, that's great. Now, as long as you're passing, that is all that matters to get the credit for this course. But some of you may be hoping to go on to college or university, in which case they will actually look at the proper grade. Certain types of courses in university or college may be asking for a B average or an A average. So that's where the kind of the more fiddly stuff might come into play. And you can see, I put the 1, 2, 3, 4 because that's listed in our document. I'm not sure if that's helpful or not helpful, but it's there. 1 minus would be the same thing as a D minus, is from 50 to 52. 1, which is the same as a D, is 53 to 56. 1 plus, which is the same as a D plus, is 57 to 59%. 2 minus or C minus, 60 to 62. 2 or C is 63 to 66. 2 plus or C plus is 67 to 69. 3 minus or B minus is 70 to 72. 3 or B is 73 to 76. 3 plus or B plus is 77 to 79. 4 minus or A minus is 80 to 86. 4 or A is 87 to 94. A plus or 4 plus is 95 to 100%. Quick plagiarism reminder, please remember it's not okay to share any exam materials with other students, including telling them about the questions. In addition, it is not okay to use any work given to you by another student to substitute as your own on the exam. Plagiarism is treated as a very serious offense. Concerns on this issue will be brought to the principal for consideration, and he will determine an appropriate course of action. Please don't risk it. If you've gotten this far in the course, I promise you're going to do just fine in the exam. I don't think it's that hard. Exam prep. You will be successful with the reading in this exam if you know how to read a wide variety of materials, can answer questions about the main idea and find specific details in a text, can offer and explain your opinion on something you've read, can use inference and read between the lines to explain ambiguous phrases or commentary in a piece of text, kind of like what we talked about with idioms and proverbs yesterday. If you are able to prioritize the important details in a text, what is important versus what is not important, are able to demonstrate your understanding of a text by summarizing an article you have read effectively in a paragraph format, can use connections to your own life, other texts, and the world to help you understand what you read, can think about and discuss the message behind a text you read. I did this twice, sorry. Main idea, can write briefly about an idea, opinion, or a topic that was in a text, understand audience, tone, format, and how they influence each other, and can use context clues to understand an unfamiliar word or phrase. Okay, so some parts of the exam are going to ask you to write out answers about a reading passage. We did some multiple choice yesterday, but it's not all going to be multiple choice. There will be some writing. So one possible question might be to summarize a reading selection. We did a lot of summarizing. So you've had a lot of practice with this type of work. So we're going to look at a brief passage here and then try to summarize it. One key thing to look at is how many marks is a question worth? Obviously, an item worth more marks is expecting more writing. So they'll often tell you the number of sentences or the number of concepts you need to include. Like if they say, oh, you need to include the main idea plus 3 details, well, that's going to be at least 4 sentences, right? So be mindful of how many marks it says it is worth. I believe it does. Okay, so this, I believe we read this yesterday. What do you think is important in this article? We're going to read it and then try and highlight what we think is important. How a horse drug case has led to calls for change in Atlantic Canada's harness racing industry. A controversial ruling by the commission that governs harness racing in Atlantic Canada has prompted calls for more transparency and better oversight of an industry that receives millions of taxpayer dollars in gambling revenues each year. The controversy stems from the Atlantic Province's Harness Racing Commission's handling of a recent horse drug violation case involving PEI's Mark Campbell, one of the region's top harness racing drivers and trainers. Gary Fraser, a longtime racehorse owner and past trainer and driver in Nova Scotia, says the case has created division and frustration in the harness racing community. It kind of puts a black mark on the industry because of the way the commission handled it, Fraser said. I was on PEI for the 6th to the 9th of October for the sale and the races. And good God, you even mentioned to anybody? They'd get right into a big uproar talking about it. All the commission did was just make the public more suspicious about the racing game. In early September, Campbell was hit with an indefinite suspension by the commission after horses he trained produced 4 positive post-race drug tests in the past year, 3 of them in August. 3 of these violations were tied to one horse who tested positive for too high a level of a medication called Lasix, used to prevent bleeding in horses. The drug is administered a few hours before a race by a veterinarian or a vet tech hired by the commission. The other drug violation came after a different horse tested positive for a banned antihistamine. Campbell appealed, which led to a closed-door hearing before 3 commissioners with the Atlantic Province's Harness Racing Commission a few weeks later. Ultimately, the commission ruled Campbell wasn't responsible for the 3 Lasix positives and lifted the indefinite suspension. That ruling was based on testimony from a professor of veterinary medicine in Kentucky who said the only reasonable explanation for the 3 positive tests was that the horse metabolizes the drug at a slower rate than most. But the commission did hold Campbell responsible for the antihistamine detected in the other horse. It issued to him a $750 fine and a 34-day suspension, which included the 25 days he'd served leading up to the hearing. For some in the industry, including horse owner Robbie McMillan, that 34 days for antihistamine positive was a red flag. According to the commission's penalty table, an antihistamine is a class 3 drug that carries with it a minimum suspension of 60 days, except in cases where commissioners determined there are mitigating circumstances. And this is a really long article, so I've only got part of it here. One thing it mentions later on was that 30 days ran out right before the next big race. So that's why people kind of felt like there was something a little bit shady going on here. Okay, so how would you summarize the article? What is the main idea? Well, it's a news article. So one thing is you begin to look at the title and what's going on in the first paragraph. So they're calling for changes. There's been a controversy. They want more transparency and better oversight. Down here, they were talking about there's a closed door hearing. So when Campbell appealed this decision, there was a hearing about it, but it was closed door. Nobody knew what got said or what happened. And my impression is that there was some stuff where they were asking later and they weren't too specific. And people felt, again, that there was been a little shady going on. So here is how I ended up kind of phrasing it. There is a controversy over a horse drug violation case in which the typical penalty was reduced for popular horse driver Mark Campbell, allowing him to enter a major race. What are two of the main details regarding this event? So two of the main details is 3 of the violations got dismissed. Theoretically, the horse that had those violations might have been metabolizing a banned drug more slowly. So apparently it's legal if it's during a certain time frame. I don't know. But the other part is that the one violation that did occur only received about half the time that it normally gets, plus it ran out right before the beginning of a main race. So let me see. Right here. Oops. Why is it not moving? There we go. There are 3 other drug charges that were dismissed, although they originally resulted in an indefinite suspension. People are asking for more transparency and more oversight because people feel mistrust over their ability to operate fairly. So there is the Harness Racing Commission. One thing that came up in one of the other articles too was just that there was somebody was connected in some way to him. So some other concepts we worked with were, what is the purpose of a text? Who do you think would be the audience for this piece? Does the tone of this piece match its format? So those are some things that you might get asked about stuff you read. It's important to learn how to identify the audience, purpose, or context. We did talk about this. Audience is who the text is written to. Purpose is why was it written, and context is the surrounding time, events, and reasons that prompted the writing. And there was a nice little article here about this.
What's happening in the news today? What? With Moonwater announcement, Trump proposes Space Navy? Have you ever watched or read something that doesn't quite add up? To fully understand any text, especially a persuasive one, you need to put on your thinking cap and keep 3 things in mind: context, audience, and purpose. They all influence the creation of the text and each other. Understanding them is important when analyzing a text in subjects like English, history, but also in later life outside of school. Your grasp of them will influence how you interpret the text and the author's intentions. The circumstances that form the setting of a statement or an idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood, is the context. It refers to the environment in which the text was created, all the things that were happening in the real world during that time. These events can be very important, so you need to ask yourself what the cultural, social, or political climate was at the time. You may need to be aware of them in order to fully understand it. For example, cigarette advertisements from the 1940s and 50s promoted the healthy benefits of smoking in a time when the dangers of tobacco smoke were not widely known. Running these same adverts today would not be as effective or even legal in some places. Let's say you need to analyze a text created in the United States of America in the year 2020. In terms of the context, the things you may need to take into consideration include lockdowns, homeschooling, and 300,000 deaths due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There was also 14% unemployment, the Black Lives Matter protests and riots, and The year concluded with Donald Trump not accepting the fact that he had lost the election. The audience is the person or the group that the text is trying to reach and speak to. The manner in which a text or argument is presented, the tone and the word choice, will change depending on the intended audience. Their age range, gender, religious beliefs, nationality, ethnic and cultural background all impact how a text has been created. Informal language or slang might not be understood or appreciated by an elderly audience. References to pop culture or culturally specific terms will not be understood by everyone. For example, the simile, the bruise was as purple as a docker, would not make sense to English speakers outside of Australia. It might not even be understood by some Aussies living in, say, Queensland. Additionally, the content may change depending on the audience. For example, an article about reducing the anxiety on the first day of school will be different for Australian or American parents because of our different cultures, circumstances, and expectations. The purpose is the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. The purpose of a text can fall into three broad categories: to inform, to entertain, and to persuade. These can overlap, of course. When it comes to analyzing a text, you will need to determine exactly what it is trying to persuade you of. It might be to change the audience's behavior or habits, which the author views as unhealthy. It could be to shame careless and inconsiderate drivers about their manners on the road, or persuade students to read 20 minutes a day. Let's put this all together and look at some examples. An article about dogs being let off leash near playgrounds. Well, the context could have been that dogs were scaring or biting children, or perhaps they found dog poo in the sandpit. The audience would be the dog owners, the people who are letting their dogs run wild. And the purpose would be, you guessed it, to leash their dogs, to be considerate of others. An essay on the dangers posed by social media on teenagers. Well, the context could be that there's an increase in cyberbullying, depression, and anxiety amongst teenagers. The audience could be the teenagers, or maybe even their parents or their teachers. And the purpose could be to raise awareness or to reduce social media consumption. And lastly, a YouTube video about the benefits of reading 20 minutes a day. Well, the context could be that fewer students are reading and literacy is decreasing. The audience may be students, their parents or their teachers, and the purpose would be to increase reading. Let's finish with a real-world example. Here's a popular cartoon you may have seen online. The waiters are only serving the soldier and ignoring the other customers. As you can see, the soldier represents war, while the other customers left without food or money are education, healthcare, libraries, and art, among others. The cartoon is titled, "In America, at this restaurant, only one person is served." It was published in 1953 in a satirical magazine in the Soviet Union. So the original context then is the Cold War, which pitted the democratic USA against the communist USSR. The audience would be the general population of the Soviet Union and other communists. And the purpose would be to point out the flaws of America and democracy as a whole and undermine the opposition. Context, audience, and purpose. They all need to be kept in mind when analyzing a text. If you found this helpful, consider...
Oops. Okay. So I thought he explained that really well. So I wanted to kind of have you guys take a look at that. What about tone? Look at the words used to understand the tone. Tone could be formal or informal. It could be serious or funny. It could be hip or old-fashioned. This is one I feel like I had a hard time understanding when I was younger. And as I was reading about this, I felt like the biggest thing was tone is involved in the choice of words. So when you're looking at what the tone is, you're looking at the specific words they've used. And again, this is one I feel like maybe somebody else can explain better than I can, because I just feel like it's one of those concepts that I really have struggled with.
Wix is your platform to perform on.
The key to understanding a writer's tone is simple. Pay attention to their words. It is an author's diction, the word choices they make, that reveal the attitude the writer has towards their audience and subject. If a writer dazzles you with academic words, they are employing a formal tone, or perhaps a scholarly one. If they use slang and say "I" and "lit," they are using an informal tone. Tone, you see, is a tool of persuasion. If you want your parents to buy you a PlayStation, you will talk about video games positively, as fun, entertaining, and perhaps a way for siblings to bond. You want your parents to see what you see, video games as a glorious activity that is exciting and brings people together. If you use the right words in just the right way, maybe, just maybe, they will see the light. Writers do the same thing when they try to persuade you. They use specific words and phrases to convey a tone. News articles use a formal and serious tone to persuade you that they are objective in seeking truth. Some writers use humor and self-deprecation to persuade you that they are humble and can be trusted. To be an expert at discerning a writer's tone, you must know the difference between denotation and connotation. A word's denotation is its dictionary definition. Take the word apple, for example. The dictionary definition or denotation of apple is, quote, the round fruit of a tree of the rose family, which typically has thin red or green skin and crisp flesh, end quote. If words only had a dictionary definition, interpreting text would be simple. However, words are complex and often compact with emotions and ideas. These feelings that words invoke are called connotations. An apple, for example, can represent original sin and temptation, or the Big Apple, also known as New York City. The Big Apple could conjure up ideas of a sprawling metropolis, or even giant rats. The words frugal and cheap have similar denotations to be careful with and not spend much money on. However, the connotations of each word are different. A cheap person is stingy and doesn't want to spend money for selfish reasons. A frugal person is simply someone who is smart with money and does not want to waste it on trivial things. If a person called me frugal, I would be proud. If they called me cheap, I'd be offended. Both words have similar definitions but elicit different feelings. To unravel the tone of a piece of writing, you must obsess over word connotations. You have to feel words and analyze why the writer used the words that they did. The compilation of a writer's diction or word choices reveals the tone of the writer. There is only one solution, one proven method to improve your ability to understand word connotations. You have to read, and you have to read a lot. The more you read, the more you become familiar with words and the context they are used.
Okay, so I really, really liked that. I thought he explained that better than I've ever heard it explained. I've mostly heard them talk about formal versus informal. I liked how many different ways he talked about tone. That just made so much more sense to me. Okay. Oh, hang on. Something went missing. Okay, hang on. Sorry, sometimes things kind of jump around when I'm not looking. Okay, well, I guess we'll go down here. So we often think about punctuation in writing, but sometimes we don't notice punctuation in reading, and yet it does have a meaning. We're so used to it that we don't think about it consciously, or sometimes we just kind of ignore it. Let's talk about punctuation and what the different punctuation marks mean. So if you see the question mark, obviously it's asking a question. Exclamation point is strong emotions. It could be any kind of emotion. It could be excitement, anger, fear, surprise, confusion, sadness. It might also indicate volume, that somebody's shouting or screaming, or sometimes you'll even see it as like a loud noise, like boom or bang. It is often, but not always, a command, like get out of here. A period is considered kind of a neutral end punctuation. It simply is a statement. It could be a statement of fact, an opinion, a description, or a command. It's pretty broad. It's basically our most used type of punctuation. Okay, now Commas. A comma might mean that there is a series of nouns, adjectives, or actions being listed. It also might be used to set off introductory material in a sentence, like an adverb or a prepositional phrase or clause, and it might help separate two clauses by coming just before the conjunction. A semicolon, if it's used in a complex sentence, it means that the two sentences are connected in meaning. Sometimes we also use it to separate items in a series of items that already has commas, like a date. So Monday, October, Tuesday in November, that kind of thing. Apostrophe. An apostrophe can be used to show possession, like that is Beth's car, which means the car belongs to Beth. It can also be used to show that letters are missing, like in a contraction, like don't or I'll, let's, quotation marks. Quotation marks always come in pairs. They usually look like a little 66 and then a little 99. Usually they're a sign that someone is being quoted and that these are their exact words. Hang on. However, this is a relatively new usage. I don't know if you've ever been talking to somebody and they kind of do air quotes where they take their first two fingers in each hand and they curl them up like little bunny ears. Air quotes are what people use when they're trying to say, hey, don't take this at face value. They're being sarcastic or they're lying. Sometimes people use them that way in writing. So for example, here, Alice sat on a park bench and watched the runners turn their heads towards her, trying to make eye contact. So the quotation marks in this example indicate that the runners aren't running so much as they are checking her out, and they're not being very subtle about it. So again, this is kind of unusual, and it is not a typical or traditional use of quotation marks. I'm not even sure if it's considered legitimate, but you will see it. And I wanted you to be aware that it happens. And basically, it's not a sign that somebody's saying that word. It means that the word doesn't kind of mean necessarily what it normally means. So be cautious of that. Hang on, did I get everything? Sorry, I don't know how that all got mixed up, but it did. Okay, so moving on. Obviously, punctuation can be used both in reading and in writing. You will be successful with the writing in this exam because it does have writing is if you know how to write an appropriate paragraph format, if you know how to use the writing process to do a writing assignment, if you know how to make revisions between a rough draft and a final draft, if you know how to compose the three main sentence structures, simple, compound, complex, if you know how to edit your own work for spelling, punctuation, and capitalization errors, if you know how to write in a variety of formats, narratives, summaries, opinions, and business documents such as cover letters or resumes, all of which we've done in class, right? So this is probably one of the most important things we talked about and worked with in the writing process. And that is, the writing process, which is considered these steps. So first, pre-planning or brainstorming. Second, doing a rough draft. 3, revising it, trying to make that rough draft better. Editing it, that's where you're checking for the smaller things like spelling, punctuation, and then presenting it or publishing it, right? Which in our case is just sending it to me, but maybe if you know you're a big author, it could be presenting it to a publisher or singing it in front of people if you're a songwriter. Okay. So we're going to go through the writing process steps. Pre-planning or brainstorming. Think about first, what's the topic and do you need to have an opinion on it? If you're writing a summary of something you've read, what are the main points? If you're writing a creative piece, what are your big ideas or your main points? What are some details or some stories that you could tell? What order should it go in? If you have multiple paragraphs, be sure to arrange the details in order and in the paragraph. Rough draft. Take those jot notes that you just made and start to put them into sentences and into paragraph format. Remember to use the correct paragraph structure with an opening and a closing sentence and details in between. Make sure that it is an appropriate length and that it stays on topic. Focus on making sure that you are clear and understandable as you write. This is a really big thing. I find people sometimes are trying to get a little bit fancy in the rough draft, and then they're not always getting their sentences clear. Rough draft is the time to be really clear. You can always polish up and make it seem more fancy by the final draft. Okay, so after you've got your rough draft, you're going to go start your revision. And there's a lot of different steps that you need to look at when you're doing your revision. This is the biggest one. This is like the bread and butter. Oh, wait, where's See, some things have gone missing. Okay, well, sentence structure. Bread and butter should actually be content. And if we come across it, we're going to talk about it. Content would be, is it in order? Does it make sense? If somebody reads it, do they understand what you're talking about? Have you used the format correctly? Those things are your first things. Then after you've done that, you're looking at your sentence structure. Are there any sentence fragments? You need to fix them. Are there any run-on sentences? Obviously, you need to fix them too. Can you locate a subject and a verb in each sentence? Okay. Have you joined the sentences correctly? That goes back to using conjunctions and commas. Have you used transition words and phrases to help the flow from one sentence to the next one? That's where you're using words like after that, next, finally, in a little while, after a certain time. All those kind of things sort of help the reader maintain a sense of time and order as they're reading through your stuff. Okay. Yep, we did that. Check your word choice. Have you used a word too many times and need some synonyms? Have you used vague words that might be more specific? So for example, instead of said, you've replaced it with the word screamed or muttered or some other word that paints a more detailed picture. This is one of those key things where when you're trying to get fancy, this is a great place to get fancy. Take a look at some of your words and think about, what could I use? Where could I use a word that's more elegant or more unusual or more vivid, and that will just create a richer picture in the mind of the person reading it. All right, then check your grammar. Do the subject and the verb agree? A singular noun needs a singular verb. A plural noun needs a plural verb. Have you used a consistent verb tense? An awful lot of time we write in the past tense. If it changes, is it because you just forgot, or is it because the time frame you are discussing has been changed? So for example, let's say I was reading a business memo and they were talking about, going forward, we're going to do this, we will do that, we would, we might, all those kind of things. They've used new verb tenses because now we're talking about the future. So be mindful of that, kind of go through it and make sure it makes sense. Have dependent clauses been joined to an independent clause using a subordinate conjunction? And the last one sounds funny, but it really is a basic one, is, are there any places where it sounds a little awkward and confusing and it just needs to be rewritten? It might be grammatical technically, but if it doesn't quite make sense or your reader's a little confused, then it's worthwhile to take the time to go back, make it simpler. A lot of times that's the easiest way for this, is just kind of shorten it. Sometimes we've just tried to get too fancy and it just become confusing. All right. Then check your punctuation, which we've talked about in detail. Have you followed the rules for quotation marks? Have you followed the rules for commas? Those are the two biggest sources of errors. Have you used colons and semicolons appropriately? Is your end punctuation correct? Do any apostrophes indicate either belonging or contractions? I want to point this out. I've noticed that spell check does not like hyphens. They always want me to take it out. Watch if I take it out, they'll be so happy. And yet a hyphen is completely appropriate in that. I don't know if it's just a modern thing, because I've noticed consistently it's telling me I'm spelling something wrong, and it's a hyphen that I know perfectly well. It's been a legitimate way to spell the word for years. But anyways, that is what spell check does not like. Editing steps. Check your capitalization. The beginning of every sentence is capitalized. The word I is capitalized even in contractions. So phrases like I'll, I'd, I've, or I'm, you can't use the little I, you have to use the big one, okay? It's referring to a person, and so we use a capital letter. The first word in a dialogue quote is normally capitalized because it's showing that it's the beginning of their sentence. The only time when you wouldn't do that is if you were quoting somebody and maybe they made like a long speech and you just want to use the last little bit of their sentence. In that case, you'd use like a little ellipse, like dot, 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 and then you would put a lowercase. And the whole reason is because then you're trying to show it isn't the beginning of a sentence. So that's a little bit touchy, but normally I would err on the side of putting a capital there. Names should be capitalized. Months and days like January, February, or Monday, Tuesday, those need to be capitalized. Place names need to be capitalized. Kenora, Sioux Lookout, Mishkegaming, Cat Lake, they all need capitalized. Name titles have been capitalized. These aren't used that often up here, but they might get used if you were doing some sort of research. Mr., Mrs., Ms., Doctor, Sir, Dame. Again, because they're part of a name or they get used as part of a name, they always have a capital. Book, movie, and game titles have been capitalized. If you're referring to the game Fortnite, you would put a capital. And part of the reason is just because those words are normal words. Putting a capital there kind of like warns the reader, hey, I mean the game, not just the concept of a Fortnite, which is like a 2-week thing. Complex and compound sentences do not use a capital letter where the two sentences join. There are also no capitals in the middle of a word. This is especially important if you're doing handwriting. There's a few capitals I know people like to use, like the A, B, M, and N. Try not to. Check your spelling. Use your spell check. Make sure that easily mixed up words have not been used incorrectly, like loose, lose, then, past, past, choose, chose, accept, accept. And make sure you've used the right homophone. Homophones are words that sound exactly the same, and yet they have a different spelling because they mean something different. So like light is to illuminate, and the other light is like a diet item. Night is a guy in an armor trying to fight something. Night is darkness. Right is like somebody's correct. The other right is you're going to take a pencil and paper and put something down. Road is like a street. The other road is like I rode my rowboat. We got the there. The first one is possession. Second one is location. Third one is the contraction of they are. And then we've got it's and its. First one shows possession. Second one shows the contraction it is. Okay. I included a little list. These are commonly misspelled words. And I find a lot of times one of the issues is people not being sure if it needs 2 letters or 1 letter. So a word like accidentally, does it need 2 C's or 1 C? Well, it needs 2. 2 L's or 1 L. Same thing for accommodate. 2 C's, 2 M's, but only 1 D. Other times it's where in the original, the word would end with an E, but they drop it because they add an ending like an argument. Some other unusual ones are like acquit and acquire. Sometimes people forget the C before the Q. So this is just a quick one if you're using these kind of words in your work to become familiar with. One thing to think about spell check is, like, for example, on the exam, you're not going to have the spell check. You're going to have to do your spelling on your checking on your own. So something to be mindful is it is a good idea still to be aware of how words are spelled. We're not going to know every single word. We all make mistakes for sure. I often get the word occasionally wrong. For some reason, I always want to add an extra S in there. But anyways, something to be mindful of. Paragraph format. Remember that we have a beginning. The beginning is going to be that topic sentence. The middle is your meatiest part. It has all the different pieces where you're giving your details. And then the end is a closing sentence. Sentence structure. This is, like, I think one of the most challenging concepts. Simple sentences have a subject and a predicate. The subject includes a noun and a pronoun, and it might have adjectives, or it could even be a noun phrase. The predicate includes a verb and might include adverb phrases, prepositional phrases, or possibly a direct or indirect object. So for example, the dogs run quickly. The dogs is your subject and it just has the article in the noun. The colorful leaves are falling down off the tree. Colorful leaves is a noun phrase because it's got the adjectives plus the noun. Whoever you want to invite, that's a noun clause because you have pronoun and you got a verb, but it's still part of a simple sentence because you still only have one subject, one verb, and a basic sentence. You're not putting two sentences together. Pizza and hot dogs are my favorite foods. This is a compound subject where there's two different subjects being talked about. A simple sentence might also have a compound predicate where a subject is doing two actions. So for example, the children dove and swam all afternoon. This is still considered a simple subject sentence, even with a compound predicate. A simple sentence might include a direct object or a direct object and an indirect object. So Jason threw the ball is your direct object. Jason threw Jennifer the ball. Jennifer is the indirect object, the ball is the direct object. A simple sentence can have an adverb at the beginning of the sentence or the end of the sentence. At the end, we don't use a comma. We will celebrate his birthday tomorrow. Or we could say tomorrow, comma, we will celebrate his birthday. It can also have an adverb phrase at the beginning or the end of the sentence. He became tired of playing football very quickly. Very quickly, comma, he became tired of playing football. Now, these are all considered a simple sentence, even if they somewhat look complicated. Even though they may be complicated, they don't qualify as a compound or a complex sentence unless you're putting two main clauses together. And these don't have two main clauses, okay? So, compound sentence is simply where two simple sentences are being joined with a coordinating conjunction. Those conjunctions are for and nor, but, or, yet, and so. That's it. Those are the only coordinating conjunctions. For example, I loved going to the baseball games, comma, and I hated going to the opera. We use a comma right before the conjunction to help separate the two sentences, but a comma cannot be used that way all by itself. It has to have the conjunction there too. Complex sentences. We did so much work on complex sentences. It's kind of hard to reiterate all of it here. It's honestly quite a long lesson, but complex sentences basically happen when there's a dependent clause and an independent clause, and we join them together. And remember, a clause is any group of words that have a subject and a verb, and we join them with subordinating conjunctions. And there's a long, long list of subordinating conjunctions. Again, you can find them in the other classes. Dependent clauses can be an adverb clause or an adjective clause or a noun clause. Again, we've talked about these in previous lessons. There's just not enough time to be able to discuss them all again today. Where are we at? Oh, this is a nice little site I found, which if you're worried about grammar is a great way to go over some basic grammar points. It's put out by the University of Victoria. And the nice thing is it usually has a lesson and an exercise. So I'm going to grab simple sentences just to show you. So there's a lesson and it tells you all about simple sentences and gives you some examples and gives you some things of what not to do. And then it gives you an exercise where you can show to yourself whether you understand it. So for example, select the simple sentence that has a subject, verb pattern. So two subjects, one verb. Spaghetti and pizza are very tasty. Well, that seems like a likely possibility. We often eat spaghetti or pizza. No, because we is your subject. We can have pizza for dinner or cook pasta. Nope, we is still your subject. My friend cooks and eats spaghetti. Nope, because my friend is still. So the first one is your subject. Okay. So then I could go on to the next one. Select the simple subject, which has a subject, verb. So this one has one subject, but two verbs. My friend's daughter is a nursing student. Nope, that's one subject, one verb. My oldest daughter is a student and teaches math. Well, there's 2 verbs. Let me see if there's any other ones. Being a student can be very stressful, especially during final exams. Nope, that's the only verb there, can. A student's life is not easy, and is my only subject, verb, sorry. So this is a really nice way to go back through, hang on a sec, and practice any concept that you're feeling a little nervous or uncertain about. Especially they go through complex sentences. So there's a whole bunch of information here on complex sentences. And then they give you an exercise. Okay. So for here, they just want you to pick what is a complex sentence. Okay. So among all of your friends, who has the most influence on you? No. What is the most important thing that you learned from your parents? Parents are also teachers. Parents love and teach us. No. What is the most important? I'm confused by that one. Oh, you know what? It's going to be this one because here is no. There's no verb. It's going to be B. Oh, that was tricky putting it in a question. Because what is your subject? Here's a verb. And then over here, we've got a subject and a verb. That was really sneaky. Okay. Choose the answer, which is a complex sentence. Children who have divorced parents have many difficulties. Divorce makes life difficult for children as well as parents. Being the children of divorced parents must be very difficult. Divorce is a big problem here in Canada and becoming bigger every year. Ooh, this is tough. Children who have divorced parents. No. Oh my goodness. I'm not sure. No. All right, now I'm just kind of curious. Really? Children who have divorced parents have many difficulties. See, I would say that this whole part is a noun clause, and I would not count that as a complex sentence, but okay. It doesn't matter if you know what it's called. It just kind of matters as you're editing if you know that it counts as a legitimate sentence. That's kind of the big issue. So then I'm going to close with 2 little memes. My first one is, if you've seen the movie Taken and his big tough speech about coming after people. So remember, as you're doing this exam, channel your inner Liam Neeson. I have a very particular set of skills. I will find your questions and I will answer them. And then we've got, in the spirit of Halloween, our favorite little Ghostbuster guy here. Hey, you over there, you can rock the test. So just, if you've gotten this far in the course, don't worry, you will do fine on the exam. If you have a DEC, talk to them about doing the exam and they will contact me. If you do not have a learning center in your community or where you're working from, just message me directly and I will talk to my boss and we'll figure out what to do and how to help you take the exam. Okay. Let me see if I have anything else. I think that's kind of it. Yep. That's kind of it. Biggest thing I feel, if you're feeling nervous about your writing, just give yourself a few writing prompts and practice writing, or do some work with sentence structure. That is probably the trickiest part. And remember commas and quotation marks. I've really enjoyed teaching the course. Remember that you have until June to finish this, unless you're a radio Zoom student. I think I only have one of these. Go ahead and contact me if you need me to roll the marks over. If you have any questions about an assignment, go ahead and contact me. I'd be happy to help you. I've gotten all sorts of assignments for people in this course, and I can't wait to get more. And I will see you guys next term.